Hello and welcome back to the shop. These are two rat rods which I built from my collection of three quite fast toy grade F1 cars, and for some time I've been wondering about what sort of vehicle I might use the last of my three F1 chassis to build. Both of these are based on quite small vehicles. This is actually a Ford Model Y and this a Ford Popular, both passenger cars. This time I wanted to do something different, something bigger. And for that reason, I've bought this. This is a WL Toys copy of the famous WLP 1/16th scale bobbed M35 military truck. And it's in 1/12 scale, the same scale as the Formula 1 car whose chassis we'll be borrowing to build our rat rod. As an RC model in its own right, this is rather disappointing. It has one forward speed, one reverse speed, and full lock steering either way. That's all it's got, but we don't mind because I just bought it for that wonderful cab. Here then we have the F1 car with its body removed. While I had the rear wheels off in order to trim away a part of the body that doesn't unscrew, I took advantage of the opportunity to paint the sidewalls black. Next I'll take out the toy grade 27 MHz combined receiver in ESC. The only complex thing about that is that the battery on these lives underneath and the hole here is too small to pull that out, that plug. So I enlarged that hole because I like using this battery bay underneath, and I'll want to push my new cables through with a plug on the end. Okay, it's not the neatest hole in the world, but the plug does fit through it. The next thing to do is to remove the toy grade steering servo, and then I can load this thing up with hobby grade electronics. I've just had a rather worrying thought. If I go ahead and just put these electronics right here where I thought I'd put them, my cab's not going to fit. I think what I need to do is take the cab from the RC truck and position that where I want it, and then fit the electronics around it. This cab still has the interior fitted. I think I'll need to take that out because I want to cut this here, straight down there. I don't want to cut through these hinges, and it looks to me as if they're being trapped by this piece of black plastic which forms the interior. So I think I need to get this off so I can take the bonnet or hood off, and then I can attack this thing with the Dremel. Well, there's no going back now. The interior does seem to be posing something of a problem. It may even be that I might have to sacrifice it in order to get this cab to sit low enough on this F1 car chassis. After a brief struggle with the retaining clips, I succeeded in removing the interior and also the two silencer exhaust stacks that come up the back of the cab. What colour should I paint the interior? I've had a look on Google Images, and these vehicles' interiors, including the dash, were simply painted whatever colour the outside of the vehicle was painted. But I'm going to leave my floor black, do my seats dark brown, and then maybe the dash and the console in the exterior colour. Which forces me to decide now what colour to paint the outside of the body. While I was painting these seats brown, it struck me that military vehicles are often repainted according to the theatre in which they're next to serve. So if I paint the inside of this thing the nearest I can manage to khaki, it doesn't follow that I absolutely have to paint the outside khaki as well. The reason I'm concerning myself so much with the interior so early in the build is because the positioning of that centre console will pretty much determine where all my electronics have to go. While we're on the subject of electronics, this is the setup I'm going to use, except I'll be using a smaller battery. The receiver's nice and small, and this ESC is the only one I can find that has the capacity to run a 540 motor but will still fit under the transmission tunnel of the M35 body's interior. So let's just try a little test. Okay, we've got steering. What about throttle? That sounds horrible. I think the problem's in the diff. I'll just try one thing. I'll stop one wheel at a time. So, stopping the left wheel. The right one doubles in speed. stopping the right wheel. Left one doubles in speed. That differential's working, but it feels absolutely horrible. Fortunately, I only ever use these drag racing cars for drag racing. They don't have to go around any corners. So let's hope there's a good few runs in it before this diff actually lets go. Okay, I'll get the electronics installed, and then it'll be time to return our attention to the body. I've mounted the ESC at the front with the receiver just behind it. This coincides with the shape of this transmission tunnel, which has had some judicious surgery done to it to accommodate everything. But now the interior fits in place and goes all the way down to rest on the top of the battery box. And the cab sits down on top of it. Have I got it low enough? I hope that's more or less low enough. It would sit something like that. Now that the interior sits down flush against the battery box, I've been sorting out where various wires are going to go, and I think I've got it all as tidy as I'm going to. Which means that it was time to turn my attention to the cab. So I filled in the holes where the two exhaust stacks used to mount on the back, as well as these two little triangular areas, and then I cut a bulkhead from the plastic flap on the top of a dead printer. With the bulkhead glued in place, we've got ourselves a rolling vehicle, and by fiddling with it obsessively, I've managed to get the body to sit quite low down, and it fits that low with the interior in position, though admittedly the interior isn't actually bolted to the body at the moment. This is what we have behind the cab. A nice, relatively uncluttered view from behind, though at the moment I don't know what I'm going to do about the back end. But before worrying about that, I'm going to concern myself with how I'm going to fix the body in position. After gluing a block of wood to each side of the battery box, I was able to put a couple of screws in, and that's the body mounted. What sort of configuration engine should I use? Well, the M35 itself came with a straight 6 multi-fuel engine, but I don't want to be shackled to the idea of building an M35 rat rod. I want the rat rod to be a representation of something that's been built by someone who's just using an M35 cab, so I don't have to have air brakes, I don't have to have the multi-fuel straight 6 engine that came with the M35. And that's a good thing, because with this wide, low bulkhead, I like the idea of trying to do a Styrene V8 to cover that servo. Is where the left-hand rear view mirror clipped in. I've lost it, so I've plugged the hole with a little square of styrene and then made from a cocktail stick a scale hinge and stuck that over the top. Where the bulkhead joins the body at the top, there are a couple of holes where the hood or bonnet used to hook on and pivot upwards. And here I've inserted a sliver of white styrene, the same thickness as the body, because I just did a poor job of cutting this originally. Although I haven't yet settled on an exterior colour for this cab, I do know that I'd like to retain the existing colour on the inside. So before I spray it with primer, I'm going to mask up the windows to keep all the paint on the outside. Before I do get the paint out, I should quickly introduce you to the vehicle's driver. He was very, very cheap. 2 soldiers and 2 assault rifles for £1.50. But he's feather light because he's hollow. He did, however, have lots of grenades on his tummy. When I ground those off, I was left with loads of holes in him. So I filled him with filler, and I'm afraid he's going to have to lose the lower part of his legs to fit into our scale interior. I gave the cab a coat of dark red matte plastic primer, and then gently sprayed it with some orange and some brown. Now to salt it and spray it the top colour. Here's the driver now that I've turned him into a civilian. He's got a brown jacket, brown hat and blue jeans on. I did have to heat his arms with a small blowtorch and bend them in so that they could grip the wheel, and I also had to trim off his legs so that he'll fit comfortably in his seat. As for the cab, here it is covered in salt. The black stuff on the roof is rock salt that comes in bigger chunks. I've also stuck a couple of strips of masking tape in selected locations. I've decided to spray this green, largely because it's Sunday and green is the only military colour I have. Now that the cab's dried, I can wash off the salt and see what sort of effect I've got here. I've washed the salt off, glazed the screen and the passenger window and put the interior in with its driver. Let's have a close-up look at a rusty bit. This is all just paint. I used a total of 4 colours: the matte red primer, dark brown, black and orange before I put the salt on. I lost the left-hand rear view mirror, but I've rusted up the right one. And I've stuck some shiny tin foil on the back of the mirror. I didn't glaze the cab's rear window because its receiver's antenna likes to stick out through that hole. There's the body then, screwed to the chassis in its final position. And I think the next thing I need to do is to build the styrene engine to cover the steering servo. These are the very beginnings of the V8. I don't glue this to the servo, it just sits over it. As you can see, it's pent roof because this is going to be the top of the cylinder block and the heads will then stick out to either side. At the moment it does look as though I'm building a very tall dog kennel, but this is designed to fit over the servo saver and the cylinder heads will go here. This is the left hand side of the V8. As you can see, we've got everything on there from wooden kebab stick, contact lens saline bottle, tip of a marker pen and even a couple of electronic bits and bobs like these tiny diodes. Progress continues on the V8. Let's go over to the bench. Here we've got a couple of ancillaries. This is to be an oil filter. That's a random ancillary which is going to go on horizontally near the front. And then there are these 2 black plastic blocks. Each of these is actually 4 thicknesses of printer flap, top flap printer lid, and each of these will form a cylinder head. There'll be a rocker cover going on top as well. I've glued these together with epoxy because I need to drill into them to install the exhausts and the inlet manifolds. The junction box lid and printer flap have taken quite a pounding during the course of this build, but fortunately I found this today. So far no bought styrene has gone into the making of this engine. Well, that lucky find proved to be just enough plastic to make these 2 rocker covers with a little scrap left over. Good. We've got a recognisable V8. Let's have a look from in front. And it's not too high. I don't want the carburetor to obscure the driver's view. And so far it's all from scavenged plastic. I reckon now's the time to start thinking about some sort of carburetor. And at long last my streak of good luck is over. I went for a walk this morning but found no 4mm styrene rod, so I had to break out for the first time in the build of this motor some of my Ever-Oak American-made modelling styrene to make this pair of inlet manifolds. You may also note that I've used PVA to denote the positions of the bolt heads which secure the rocker cover to the head, as I did previously on my 4 plates. Now to make a convincing carburetor to sit on top of that manifold. I've had a strange idea about how to begin. I'm going to begin with one of these chocolate blocks used for joining cables because it has 4 inlets, as it were. I think I should be able to do something with this. I've been continuing to add things to the carb. I've been gluing more bits and pieces to the carb, and while I wait for the glue to dry so I can carry on working on the carb, I've just given this a quick coat of silver. It's deliberately slapdash because I'm going to weather this engine. I've weathered the engine with a light black acrylic wash, and here we see the 4-barrel carburetor. I turn it once, that's the right hand side, back. Here on the left we have throttle cable stop and a little lever for it to pull on. This distributor is the tip of a pen flooded with epoxy and with 9 pieces of rusty wire jammed into the top. One of those will be the king lead bringing current to the distributor, and the other 8 will be HT leads taking it out to the spark plugs. Here's the engine with the distributor mounted to the back. The bolt holding the carburetor on is far too long, but I just wanted to show you the throttle linkage and cable. The throttle cable disappears down the back of the engine, where it's fixed to this little bracket, which also has a place for the king lead from the distributor. At last the engine is done. It has a king lead delivering current to the dizzy. It has a fuel pipe delivering fuel to the carb. It has a pancake air filter because I'm anxious to try and keep the height of the whole thing down so the poor guy can see out. And it has a throttle cable going to the linkage here. Now what it needs are some exhausts. Here you can see the oil filter on the left. I did also make an alternator to be mounted horizontally here, and I even glued it on, but I had to pull it off before the glue dried when I realised that it would actually foul the exhaust pipes. Speaking of exhaust pipes, they're next. I've cut 8 50mm lengths of 4mm styrene rod to make the exhausts. In 1/12 scale, it's about 2mm to the inch, so this 4mm rod represents a 2-inch pipe. I'm hoping that the comparatively fat bore of 2 inches per header will make it look as if someone's just grabbed some old scaffold tubing and made themselves some headers out of that. That completes the motor. I'd love to vanish down a rabbit hole of adding more and more detail to it, but I know from experience with any RC model that you're actually going to drive and that goes fast, you'll only break your heart if you add too much scale detail. Sometimes in the pursuit of great art, ethics can go out of the window, and so it is in this case, for I must confess that the top of my pancake air filter was until very recently a plastic chrome bottle cap on a bottle of makeup in the bathroom. My wife's wondering where the lid is. If we leave moral compromises aside, however, we're rewarded by a reasonably convincing, very cheap to build V8 covering the steering servo. To keep it company, it could really do with a clutch master cylinder, a brake servo and a brake master cylinder. In order to make the brake servo or booster, I need to take the lid from a bottle of shampoo in the bathroom. But the trouble is, my conscience is still nagging me about the perfume bottle lid which I sacrificed to make my pancake air filter. I have, however, thought of a solution. This solution consists of a piece of cardboard, some PVA adhesive, and a square of new, shiny aluminium foil. Once that glue's dry, I'm going to use it to repair the lid of the perfume container. Super glue. There. So this is what a clear conscience feels like. Now I can go ahead and claim my brake booster. The first thing to do is to flood the hollow back of it with plaster of Paris so that I can glue it to this back plate, which I cut from the very last of the lucky find which enabled me to make the rocker covers, that last sheet of black plastic. And now I can add this little master cylinder, which I've just knocked up from some bits and bobs, pieces of styrene. The end result is a brake booster or servo with dual circuit plumbing attached and a little clutch master cylinder. I took a plywood block and made it into a simple vehicle battery. I think this is a 105 amp hour battery. It looks a little more convincing after a coat of paint. The body's back on with the battery fitted. Sadly, there wasn't room for me to fit my improvised clutch master cylinder, so this truck's going to have to be an auto. Up next, some kind of back body to cover the motor and this heatsink, though I'd like to leave the rear axle exposed because I think it looks awesome from behind. I'm going to try and build quite a brief back body then, leaving the rear axle exposed, and some sort of fuel tanks, though ideally I would like to be able to put my GoPro up against the back window, which does preclude the traditional large fat tank running across here. I've made myself a cardboard template which fits over the truck like that. Now I need to duplicate that in styrene, like this. I did have to make a small cutout to clear a little electronic component that pokes out from the side, but I'll just build a box around that. And here it is. I just need to trim it and to find some means of mounting it to the chassis. I've built a simple box. That's the component I need to enclose. However, I want to add some further trim to the top. This is the base from a clear plastic food container. I noticed it contains a diamond tread pattern, so I've cut it to sit in there. I've added some basic trim pieces to the back body on the right and built a basic styrene box around the annoying sticky out bit. This thing. I'll put a light and turn signal indicator in each of these areas as well. I've also had an idea about what to do about the fuel tanks. I did think of trying to cram some skinny ones under these steps, but then something occurred to me. This rear box encloses a substantial volume. There could easily be a fuel tank in there, so all I have to do is come up with some sort of filler neck to stick on here. The rear body's mounted. I made up some little angle brackets out of aluminium and used them to fix the body on here and in the equivalent place on the other side. There they are. The last job to do with this before paint is to add the fuel filler neck and its surround. After it's painted, I'll add further detail such as some rear lights. With the filler neck stuck on, I was able to give the whole thing a coat of my patent rusty 4 colours. Now that all there is left to do to the back body is to paint it green, I'm going to move on to the next question. What to do about the nose cone? Because this thing's based on an F1 chassis, it's necessary to have a nose cone because I have to conceal the fact that there's no radiator and everything up here. Usually I'd either use a trusty Ford Model Y cowl, or in this case, as it's a military vehicle, it did cross my mind that it might be fun to make the front panel from a Willys MB Jeep. But then I realised I need more than that. I need the hood or bonnet coming back to cover my suspension, so I had an idea. This. Let's look at it from in front. These front wheels are of quite a small diameter, and I plan to change them for considerably larger ones. So it does mean that these front mudguards will have to go to let the cowl come down and sit at this height. It's not quite ready to go on though. First, I want to cut out the radiator aperture. This model actually had an opening hood, so I've cut the hinge off the back of the hood and glued it to make it one piece. With the front wheels removed, I can see that the cone actually wants to sit at this height on the camera. Like this. I'd better get on with finding a way to mount it like that. The nose cone's mounted. I screwed a couple of aluminium angle brackets to the fixed upper wishbone and just fixed them to them. That's good. The next thing to do is to take it off and paint it. I've added some cloth here because it's completely non-reflective and has a bit of a texture to it, which reminds me of a 1/12 scale radiator. With the nose cone painted, all I have to do is add the grille, mount it permanently, and that'll be one more thing crossed off the list. After that, we're going to be looking at front wheels. After painting the winch, I gave it a dark acrylic wash to bring out the individual lines of the cable. Also, just before I glazed the headlights, I glued a small square of tin foil in at the back to block the holes where the LEDs are supposed to go. This cheap truck came with LED holes but no LEDs. I'm trying to get the light so you can see that I've glazed the headlamps, but it's not easy. This is the first time I've seen the truck with everything bolted on at once. The nose cone and the back are both screwed in place, and this is how it's going to look. All, of course, except for the front wheels. To get front wheels, I visited the Tamiya stable, but rather than using their 1/14th range of semi-truck wheels, I wanted something skinny. So I went for the Sand Scorcher. Now, although this is only a VW bug wheel, it is a 1/10th scale VW bug, and this is a 1/12th scale truck. So they should be big enough. And I've splashed out on some Shapeways 3D printed steelie conversion plates. Now I have to work how to bolt all this together. When I ordered the Sand Scorcher wheels, they came with these steel bearings, and I was very happy about that until I remembered that the stub axles on this F1 car are too fat to use these bearings. I soon realised that my best option was to use the white plastic Tamiya wheel bushes, which are supplied with many of the kits, because those I can drill out to suit the stub axles on the F1 car chassis. However, I didn't have any of these bushes, and this is where an opportunity to thank somebody comes in, because Rob Brennan from Rob Brennan RC, a YouTuber whom I have never met, very kindly posted me 20 of them so that I could get on with this build. Thank you, Rob. This is how it looks with the rear lights fitted. I also added a homemade spotlight, which I made by cutting the tip from a 12-gram CO2 gas cartridge. Also, the Rob Brennan RC wheels of gratitude are fitted, which means one thing: this rat rod's finished and ready to race.